I always knew my father had participated in World War II, but as a child, it seemed so far away and unreal. I didn't think much about it. To his family, he was a devoted father, a loving husband, an ordinary man. But as I got older, I started to realize my father had had another life, one full of adventures and exotic places, terrible tragedies and unacknowledged victories. As a young man, he had piloted a B-24 Liberator bomber through 36 missions in India and Burma. Intrigued by this unfamiliar side of him, I started to really listen to his stories and rediscovered my father as a young man, bravely taking part in a war on the other side of the world. In all the years that he would tell me the stories about his days in the Air Force, he was really proud about it. He would show me lots of pictures, even made model planes of his Liberator. I knew that he was very attached to it, and it was something that was really important to him. It was always tinged with a pinch. There was something missing. And then he told me that he really felt bad, and he's a really modest man. He's really humble, but I know that he was, all these years, he's been completely heartbroken that his squadron was never recognized. It had no badge. He felt forgotten. He was completely chagrined that no one ever knew about it. Whenever we looked it up in the records, it was never mentioned. There's been no historical record. The RAF doesn't know much about it. The RCAF just washed their hands of it. It really hurt him. So I wanted to try to rectify that and give him his dream of flying one last time.
You walk in there, the guns are there, the radios are there, the bombs are there. Of course, the guns don't work. They don't want people shooting anybody down anymore, but everything is
When I
just
discovered
exactly
that the
what it
Collings
was.
Foundation of Stowe, Massachusetts had refurbished a Liberator from India, I realized that this was my chance. My father's dream was to fly in the Liberator again, so I arranged a flight into his past, and I went with him.
We're coming in on a wing and a prayer. Coming in on a wing and a prayer. Though there's one motor gone, we will still carry on. We're coming in on a wing and a prayer. What a show, what a fight. Yes, we really hit our target for tonight. How we sing as we glide through the air. Look below, there's our field over there. With a full crew aboard and our trust in the Lord.
We arranged for him to make one last flight on the flight route last flight with the combat figures sequence in the world. Flight Lieutenant Badger's and the veterans who are with us today. Flight Lieutenant Badger's last flight will be the subject of a documentary film entitled A Quiet Hero, being filmed here as part of Wings Over Walla Walla.
I started flying in the spring of 1942 on Tiger Moss, and then I graduated on Cessna cranes in November 1942, and that's when I got my wings and fully qualified. And then I had more formal training after that, and then went on finally ending up in Liberators in Nassau in the Bahamas. My Air Force career really started in Manitoba, where the Manning Depot was, but my formal flying training was in Saskatoon the following year. I remember the first time I got wore my officer's uniform, I was walking down the street of Saskatoon feeling so proud, and the first officer that came along, I saluted him because I forgot that I was an officer. You don't have to salute officers.
It's not that loud.
Not quite that fast either. It was always a young boy's wish to fly, and you can see that Grandpa was in the Royal Flying Corps in World War I, and so the tradition was sort of there. I just had to fly. That's the B-24 in front, leading the way.
With these bombers, the B-17 and the B-24, these guys just come out of the woodwork all around the world and all around this country, the Canadians and the U.S. guys and some of the other people that flew it from other countries. And the stories they tell, you know, are just are really better than any fiction that you've ever read or so forth. And it's also interesting to me that some of the guys come up and they just hang back on the other side of the fence. You know, they want to come and see the airplanes, but that's about as close as they can get sometimes. And other guys can come up and walk around the airplane. They don't say anything. They just turn away, and a lot of times with tears in their eyes. And some of the guys were very willing to relate their stories, and other guys were pretty closed-mouthed about it.
And most of the stories I told about it after the war, when I got back into Canada, no one believed me anyway. So I stopped talking about it.
To be in this position at 26 years old, where I'm a good 4 to 5 years older than most of these guys were when they'd already been in combat, it's a position that I never ever thought I would be in. You know, and obviously you have nothing but the greatest respect for these men that defended the freedom that I take completely for granted on a daily basis. So there's that part of it, but you find also that a lot of these guys, once you get talking to them and now you have a common interest with them, that you actually develop some pretty good friendships with them too along the way.
With those motors, they sure sound smooth, don't they? Eh?
Yeah.
They just sound so nice.
Why?
Just purring like a cat, like a sewing machine.
Weren't yours smooth?
Oh yeah, they were. Perfect.
But I had a call at home about 2 months ago, and I picked the phone up one evening and said, "This is Lee Badgley." Of course, I knew who Lee was immediately, and I assumed she must be in London. Why else she'd be calling me, you know? So I said, "Where are you? Come out and see us." And she said, "No, I'm in Iowa. I want to talk to you about a project," or no, I don't think that was the word she used, about an idea we have for making a documentary, mostly about my dad. And she said, "We think it would be a great idea if you and your wife could come out and participate in this." So I was quite excited about the idea, you know, and I said to my wife, "We'll go, because if there's a chance to see a Liberator or fly on it, I'm going."
We're coming in on a wing and
And the great thing about Jim is he's got an incredible sense of humor, and it always makes me laugh. He's one of the few men in the world who really make me laugh all the time. Just the way he expresses himself and the way he says things. They're very, very funny. And so I always like to be with him.
for tonight. How we sing as we glide through the air. Look below, there's our field over there. With a full crew aboard and our trust in the Lord.
Ladies and gentlemen, the B-24 Liberator.
We're coming in on a wing and a
I can't stand any more surprises.
There's someone that really wanted to be with you and flying the Liberator with you. And he's coming right over to say hello.
Oh, Jesus, thanks, Nick.
Nick.
Hi, Jim. Oh, Nick, how are you? How are you, bud? Oh, God. What a thing, eh? You didn't expect that, did you?
No.
You didn't know? Oh, I thought about you all day today driving her. You didn't know I was good?
No, just
Oh, you name it. We did everything, didn't we? We had more fun than a barrel of monkeys.
We had rooms in the same hut, you know, we call them busty huts. And there was this one hut. How many rooms would it have? 8, 10?
About 8 or 10,
Yeah. And they were all Canadians in this block, except for me. And I had a room in there. And,
we let them in. We charged them rent.
Yeah, they used to charge me rent, and they used to call me the British ambassador to this place. And then the Australians had a hut about 200 yards away, and I couldn't stop these Canadians and Australians throwing rocks at each other.
They used to fight. Oh.
They never intended to hurt each other. They were forever throwing rocks at each other. Big
Between
rocks.
the monkeys. Remember the monkeys and between the monkeys.
Right. And another thing I remember very well, because my family were all in England, you know, and there were no supplies of anything in England, but Jim and Jake, his co-pilot, who shared a room, they were forever getting parcels out from Canada of spam and prem and different kinds of meat and cigarettes and I don't know what else. So I was always on the scrounge with them.
You know, there's a possibility that thing came from 354, you know. Sounded so nice.
Yeah, it did. We didn't, of course, we didn't have that turret up front there, did we? Look at these engines.
Yeah.
We're going to get to fly on it tomorrow. And I bet that flight deck is going to look mighty small.
Yeah. Okay. I hope we can get up in that flight deck. Surely we will be able to. Huh?
I hope we can, yeah. Hey, Lee, what about the other surprise now?
Oh.
Did that work or not?
Is it something that I know about? I don't know anything
No, you don't know about it, and Jim doesn't know about it, and I don't know about it. Only Lee knows about it. And she said it was going to work out, but I don't know if it did or not.
You'll see.
You'll see. It's still there. We still have another surprise coming, and we don't know what it is.
I won't be able to sleep tonight. Do you realize what time we have to get up in the morning?
Well, it's extraordinary how you so friendly with people at this time, and that you so easily lose touch after the war. I mean, after the war I got married and got a new job, and I couldn't care less about the people I'd known during the war. It didn't seem to matter, which is a pity. And then 50 years later you wish you were in touch with all of them, don't you?
I would say probably the best time of most of our lives. I think anybody that went through it and looks back on it would say the same thing. You don't remember the bad times. You don't remember the malaria and the heat and the weather and the food and things that were about as bad as they could be. You remember the good times you had with the guys on the crew and other fellows that you met and the places that you went to and the things that you saw. And it was something that unless you have done it, you could never realize. I don't think anybody could adequately explain the feeling that you get. That was your family. Sure, you had a family at home that you cared about, were concerned about, but that was your family, your immediate family.
But they seemed to be a very happy bunch, innocent. I think it was maybe a bit of frightening for them to get into a plane and to learn how to do it, and then to know that they were going out to fight. I think that must have been in the back of their minds, always there. This is what they were going to do. And they did lose, there were quite a few pilots that died down there. In fact, there's a graveyard down in Nassau dedicated to the boys. There must be at least 75 graves, I guess, maybe more.
There was more actual deaths from accidents than from any enemy action. Inexperienced crews, faulty aircraft, weather, so many factors. I don't know whether your dad ever told you this, but we were on we were on a training mission on a Mitchell, and we were down, I guess, around northern part of South America, and one engine quit, and Mitchell was only, it didn't quit, but it was backfiring so bad that your dad had to feather it because it was just slewing the plane around like this. So they put full power on the other engine, and both your dad and Jake had full opposite rudder on to hold it straight. And we got back. By the time we got back, we're almost on the deck. And when we got back and landed, your dad blew a tire. And the CO came out and gave him proper hell.
You weren't sweating when you got off, and no one came up to you?
We started to shake when we got, you know, when we landed and stuff. I think then the realization, I can remember, came to us, and our instructor made us get ready to take off again in another aircraft. He said, "You've got to finish your mission." I thought the guy's nuts. He's crazy. But I realized that if we hadn't have done, we might have lost it. We might have been LMF, and that's lacking moral fiber. And some guys did, you know, and they got scared, and they just couldn't continue, and they would be discharged because of LMF. And it never happened. And I think this is one way that they had of preventing that. They made us take off and complete the mission again, which we did about an hour and a half later. And then when you got back safely the second time, you forgot all about it. Your fears are gone, and it's history.
Well, it's hard to describe it. I know we were just all sitting there, just sort of petrified, I guess. Well, of course, our pilots, they were busy, and the rest of the crew, we were doing what we had to do too, but it was mainly up to them to get us back to base, to Nassau. One of the concerns was that this particular plane we were flying had never been known to be ditched in the water, and weren't too sure just how we were going to get out of it if we did go down. And that didn't make us feel too much better, really.
And we stayed with that aircraft most of the time that
I discovered I could trace my father's destiny through his logbook. They traveled with the Liberator from Dorval, Quebec, to Tripoli and Cairo, and finally to Karachi, India, places that a young boy would never dare dream of.
So when you picked up this plane in Dorval and you took it all the way to India, did you have the same aircraft the whole time in India, in 354?
Yes, we did, dear. We took this particular plane, we took it to Karachi, and then I see here we flew, and that was the end of it. And then we went to Nagpur, the holding station, till we flew an aircraft to Nagpur and waited there till we got posted to a squadron. And then we got posted on to 354 in Cuttack. And on 354, most of the time, I had my own aircraft and my own aircrew. Nobody flew Patsy. We called it Patsy because the aircraft was P for Pat, and we had a girl painted on the side of the aircraft. We called her Patsy, so that was P for Patsy. And nobody but me flew that aircraft.
How ironic that your future wife is named Pat.
Yeah, this is, isn't it? Fate.
How did we meet? Well, it was at the Hammersmith Palais des Danses in Hammersmith in London in the spring of 1945. And he came to the dance hall. I was there, and I saw this very tall, blonde, handsome young man, and I quite liked how he looked. He and his friends were all in uniform. There was quite a group of them there that night. And somehow or other, he and I got together and began to dance, and we've been doing that ever since.
Look at Mom, doesn't she have attention, stiff, alert, smiley? She's the sharpest one there.
Did he like flying? He certainly did. That's all he ever spoke about, was flying. He still does.
Don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day.
This is the Army Air Force's Liberator Heavy Bomber, the ship that made headlines and was affectionately known among flyers as the Lift.
You must have felt really attached to her.
Oh, definitely. Oh, she was part of us. Yeah, really, really. Yeah, we were very proud of Patsy, I'll tell you. And it was just like our ground crew were just the same way about it, because it was their baby. You know, they didn't have any other aircraft to look after, any other crew to worry about, and so they had great pride in making sure that Patsy was the best aircraft in the squadron. It was.
Not just another relatively simple automobile with only 15,000 or so parts to be made and assembled. Each of these machines is made up of 1,225,000 parts, and each had to be perfect.
But doesn't it look nice?
Oh, it looks absolutely beautiful. Yeah, it's because this is the equivalent of what the Americans would call a B-24G or J.
J, this is a J. Yeah. That's the same as a Mark 5 or Mark 6 probably.
The gun turret in the bomber's nose was quickly installed.
That's the mid-upper turret, and the guy crawled up in that seat and sat there for hours. We had, in our aircraft, we had a radar dome which we lowered, and the operator sat here, and we had a monitor, which doesn't appear in this aircraft, but we did have, and there was a station there for him. And then right here we had a great big auxiliary generator, which was our fifth engine, we used to call it, if we lost something. That was a backup system, period, you know. That was all. These are your fuel gauges. Fuel, of course, was always a thing that we monitored very, very closely because we flew long trips, 13 hours, 12 hours, and fuel became really, really crucial to us, and you had to monitor it and make sure you had enough always. These are the gauges. These switch from one tank to another. So that was a very integral and important part of everything. Okay, now let me show you the bomb bay. You notice here that the bomb bay is configured right now for some bombs. It's got 4 there, and there's 2 more fit underneath in the same capacity here. We very rarely carried bombs. Our was mostly depth charges. They were just like 45-gallon drums, really, and we carried them here. And they sat here, and of course they were released from the pilot's control by pushing a button. You know, whenever we were told to do it, we did it. Okay, let me go back and show you where the tail gunner operated. He was the only person that was after this position here. And you can see his turret up there. And he sat there. Facing the other way, of course, but this is where he lived and died, I guess. Well, basically, your aircraft is controlled by the speed of the power that you apply to the motors, and of course, the propellers are variable pitch propellers, and you can control the number of RPMs that they work at, and these are the throttles or the boosts, and it's registered there. There's 4 indicators, 1 for each motor, and that regulates your throttle speed, and you control your RPMs on your propeller by flicking these little switches here, decreasing them up or down. So here's your RPM indicator here. So that basically tells you how much power you want, how far. These are mixture controls, which control the amount of gas that goes to the carburetor, and they're used at different times and different conditions. These are turbo boosters, when you want more power and that type of thing. All these other little switches are controls. These are cooler switches. The cowl flaps are those things on the engine, the little fins, and that controls the temperature of your engines. We had a few switches on here for bomb drops and microphone switches that they don't have in this aircraft because they have their technology for they have the mic comes out on a little thing. We didn't have those. We had to have a pressed mic and bring it. So there are a few innovations to update it, but other than that, the configuration of the cockpit and everything else is exactly the same as it was.
A touch on the hydraulic button, and the bomb bay door opens to give access to the ship.
And we used to fly with these escorting convoys over the Bay of Bengal, and in the early summer of 44, it was so hot. We used to fly with the bomb doors open, and we were changing over crews from the front to the back, and we used to come walking down this catwalk, you know, with the airplane flying and the bomb doors wide open.
All you could see was waves down below. Most of our flying was all low-level flying.
If it went down on the water, it was bad because these doors would break off immediately. So the airplane...
Yeah, we lost crews that we never did hear what happened to them. They just didn't come back after a trip. Just disappeared off the face of the earth. Don't know what happened.
Do you know what's confusing me? I can look up there and I can see the undercarriage lever and the flap lever, and if you'd asked me, I'd have sworn they were the other side. The undercarriage on the right and the flaps on the left. Memory plays a lot of tricks, doesn't it? I'll get the flag more. Let me get the flag standing there. It's a great picture, isn't it? Not you. Thought in all our minds, or certainly in the CO's mind, was that we might lose a crew in Burma who would have to make their own way out. Or we carried secret maps sewn into our uniform. Jim's got one he'll show you. I lost mine sadly. We had little compasses which were theoretically undetectable anyway. Buttons were made into compasses and so on and so on. And we carried a belt. Carry it wherever you like, but we also had mine strapped around the waist, which had a large sum of money in gold, pure gold rupees, so that we could bribe the locals, you know, or buy food or whatever. And the CO also had this idea that we had to go out and do jungle training. We had to go and spend a couple of nights in the jungle and find our own water and cook our own food and so on.
They had to go off in the jungle, I think for a weekend or something, and they were only allowed to take, I think, a rifle and a flask of water and something else. And they had to learn how to survive in the jungle in case they were shot down. Jake said it was rather frightening.
I don't think you ever dwelt on contingencies at all. You just accepted whatever came, and if you had a situation, you reacted to it. But you never dwelt on what might happen. Or
I used to think it was quite a bit about being captured by the Japanese.
You did?
Yeah, it used to worry me. Oh. Well, because we were a long, long way from home down that Burma coast. Even if you weren't shot down, something go wrong with the airplane, couldn't it?
And you might have to ditch,
as I remember. Yeah. Well, you always were light-hearted, Charlie, weren't you?
Happy-go-lucky. That's right. I don't think I ever dwelt on that.
With a happy-go-lucky crew as well.
Yeah. And then it was funny too. We operated differently out there in 354 because we were always single. We didn't have sorties of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 aircraft together. We always went out alone.
Yeah.
And you're out alone for 13 hours or whatever, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, all by yourself. So you're down the coast of
and nobody rang you or
nobody.
The only message all the time I was doing those coastal patrols. The only message I ever had from base ever was one which came through in Q code, and we didn't know what it meant, so we had to look it up in the book, and it said increase speed.
Yes,
I said to Digger, what the hell does this mean, increase speed? So we said, anyway, that's what they told us to do, so we put the power on and we started going about 20 miles an hour faster, and there was a hell of a thunderstorm at base, and we got in just before it really, so it was a good message.
Right? Good message, yeah. We have to give some praise to our navigators, you know, because the navigators, there wasn't any radio communication, not as far as directional navigation, and they all did it by DR navigation, we call it, and they'd come and we'd do all this, fly for hours and hours, and they'd get back and they'd tell us we're going to arrive at the coast at such and such a time, and you'd be there within a minute at the exact spot.
Yeah.
That's how accurate they were. And it was phenomenal how well those boys
They
were.
spoke of long, long flights navigated by dead reckoning and nighttime takeoffs, flying in extreme heat and monsoons. I search myself and can't imagine finding the kind of courage it must have taken for them to go on.
This section, coming down the coast, just offshore, I did it as low as I dare get. There are a couple of places where all these RAF squadron numbers are displayed. For instance, in the Royal Air Force Club in London, on the first floor there, they have all the squadron badges in sequence. And of course it goes 353, 355, 356, but there's nothing in the space of 354. And then there's also a church in London, which is known as the Royal Air Force Church, St Clement Danes, and all these squadron badges are engraved in the floor. And again you get 353, 355, 356, but no 354. So you feel as though the squadron has disappeared from human ken, as it were.
There was a reunion held in Toronto of people that were in India, and I guess India and the Middle East, I just forget now. And Bill Graber phoned me and he said he was going. He said, "Are you going?" And I said, "No, Bill, because I'll bet you won't see one guy there from our squadron." you won't see one person there that knows anything about our squadron, because we were never interconnected with other squadrons. We did with the Americans. We did work with the Americans, but we didn't do it with any other RAF squadrons or RCAF squadrons. And he went anyway, and I was talking to him after, and he said, "You were right. It was a waste of time going." He said, "There wasn't one damn guy there that I knew or knew me or had ever heard of our squadron or anything else."
You know, like a bunch of ghosts.
Yeah, I don't know what it was.
But it was very hurtful, particularly if we were at a function where other squadrons were represented, and it seemed to me that everyone knew where 426 Squadron was, and 434 Squadron, and all the various squadrons throughout Yorkshire, the bombing group. He'd say 354, and nobody knew what that was all about, and that was quite hurtful.
I mean, I think it was assumed that the Japanese in the Bay of Bengal would take the same kind of action against these convoys coming up the east coast of India, and we were out there escorting them day and all the time. And in fact, very, very few ships were sunk. Very little submarine activity was detected, but you have to assume that it was because we were there. If we hadn't been there doing that kind of work, then the Japanese would have had a hayride, absolutely, with those ships. They would have sunk them at... Wow.
Apparently there were a lot of young men like you who came from Canada, went over, joined the RAF, and sort of got lost in the shuffle. And they actually unofficially call that the Forgotten Air Force.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, the forgotten theater of war and everything out in the Far East, so there's no question of that, because the war that was going on in Europe took precedence over everything. You know, they got all the publicity and all the hype, and of course they were actually attacking the Germans and fighting the Germans and fighting for the survival of the free world at that time, and so that was a much more prominent part of history than what we were doing. Yet the role that we had was also very, very important, but not as glamorous, and so we were a forgotten theater of war, no question about it.
You miss flying? Did you start to miss it?
Oh, I sure did, dear, because it was such a big part of my life, and when I left India, actually, I was posted back to Canada, and that was to be it for me. I'd done my tour of duty and everything, and I presumably would be discharged, but I didn't want to quit flying. And when I got to England, I went with another chap down to RCAF headquarters in London and pleaded my case. I said, you need experienced Liberator pilots somewhere, and sure enough, I got posted to an RAF transport squadron, and then eventually wound up with an RCAF squadron on Liberators. We formed the very first Liberator squadrons that the RCAF had, number 426, and I flew there, and when they were sent back to Canada in early 1946. I was to go back with them. The squadron was to disband back in Canada. I didn't want to go, and I pleaded and pleaded, and I eventually got onto a Dakota squadron and flew on Dakotas, and on an RCF transport squadron, and flew on Dakotas and stayed with them until the very bitter end. And at the end of that time, that was about March or April 1946, I got pneumonia, and I was in the hospital for 2 weeks in Swindon. And when I came out of the hospital, I went back to the squadron, and the squadron had gone. That was the most eerie feeling I've ever had in my life. And when I got home in Canada, the realization that my flying days were over, it was pretty tough.
You still miss it?
I knew that he still missed flying and his beloved Liberator. So I arranged for the Collings Foundation to record this special bond between a man and his plane.
See, these are all the names of the men who flew the Liberator. And you're the only one up there from the RAF. And they wanted that recorded for history. So you'll be with the Liberator forever now.
What a girl.
Way we go. Okay.
RCAF, you chose the easy side. You've got a step there, I haven't got a step yet. Probably got to put my hand on this box of food. I get too much equipment here.
Okay, you need to be belted in.
It was just like a bird. I don't know. I can't describe it. You know, it was ethereal. You know, it was just something that got in your blood. And to this day, every time I hear an aircraft, it just comes back. You know.
Jack, that's the GI child. Make us lose. After you wash and dress, more or less, you don't get your breakfast.
There's a thing that happens when you're flying. It's called harmonics, something similar to that. And sometimes when you're in the rear turret, all by yourself, and it was a bright sunny day, and you were flying around, maybe 5,000 feet, you just get this euphoric feeling that you're sitting listening to great music. I mean, you don't even realize you're in an aircraft. You're sitting in the rear turret, just like I'm sitting here. And it's just like you're sitting in I don't know, in a cathedral or some similar place, and you would swear that you would hear this music. You were sort of alone in the universe. There was another soul in the world except you. That's the feeling you get. And it isn't a scary feeling. It's a comforting, delightful feeling. I don't know. I think other fellows have experienced it, said the same thing, but nobody can explain it, really. Whether you're getting closer to heaven or what, I don't know.
As soon as we took off, he unbuckled and rushed to the cockpit where he was. I mean, he just wanted to relive that time again. And I was so excited. I was thrilled. It was a feeling of just being completely at peace, knowing that he was happy. And he shook his head and said, you know, this is just like being home. I feel at home again.
This great aircraft is 110 feet from wingtip to wingtip and 67 feet 4 inches from nose to tail. Powered by 4 1,200 horsepower air-cooled engines, the lift can carry 10 men, 4 tons of bombs, and 5,000 rounds of machine gun ammunition at better than 300 miles per hour at high altitude. The B-24, as it is officially designated, can fly 3,000 miles non-stop. on solid concrete. The pilot again calls the control tower and is assigned a position on the apron.
It was a worrying time. You know, you wondered whether you'd ever see them again. And we wrote lots of letters, and they were very descriptive letters of what life was like in India. And sort of lived from day to day and hoped, well, get by today, and tomorrow they'll be coming home, the war will be over. They gave up their youth and their innocence, and they came out of the war men.
As I was making the arrangements for this nostalgic flight, I started to imagine how my father and Jack would feel to be officially recognized after all these years. When the RAF heard what I was doing, they responded immediately and arranged for Squadron Leader Gaz Borland, a veteran of Operation Desert Storm, to greet our flight as a surprise. He would make a presentation that my father had waited 50 years to hear.
The reason that Gaz is here today is the RAF headquarters in London, England, contacted the British Embassy in Washington and arranged for Gaz to meet our flight today because he wanted to say a few words on behalf of the RAF. In recognition of your service.
We are a crazy girl. Crazy girl, dear. You are a crazy girl.
Yes.
I'd like to read you a citation, gentlemen, from the Office of the Air Attaché at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. Number 354 Squadron was formed at Dry Road, Karachi on 6th of July 1943 and became operational in September of the same year at Cuttack in the Bay of Bengal. Initially tasked in the convoy escort role, by December 1943 the squadron was tasked with carrying out armed reconnaissance of enemy shipping off the Arakan coast of Burma. In October 1944, the squadron moved to Maneria in Ceylon and reverted to convoy escort duties and patrolling the sea lanes in the Indian Ocean. In January 1945, the squadron returned to Cuttack and spent the next 5 months carrying out further anti-shipping patrols off the South Burmese coast. The squadron was disbanded in May 1945. Throughout its short operational service, number 354 Squadron was equipped with a consolidated Liberator. The government of the United Kingdom, the Royal Air Force and the people of the free world owe an enormous debt of gratitude for the courage, fortitude and dedication showed by the gallant crews of number 354 Squadron, who, operating under difficult and hazardous conditions, contributed to the maintenance of open sea lanes for convoys transiting to the Far East. Among the aircrew of number 354 Squadron was Flight Lieutenant Jim Badgley and Flight Lieutenant Jack Nichol. We cannot gauge the loss of life or shipping that might have accrued had these brave and courageous aircrew not taken to the skies over the Indian Ocean and the Bay of Bengal. It is my privilege and honour to record our deep appreciation and acknowledgement of that debt on the occasion of the filming of Quiet Heroes, Story of a Forgotten Squadron, as signed by Air Commodore C.P. Lum, the Air Attaché.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And one for you, sir.
That is absolutely fabulous. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Well, I just don't believe it, honey. And that's
You
all.
weren't forgotten.
No, we're only for 50 years. And we're remembered in the end, which is really quite something, isn't it? Thank you so much. Really. You don't know how much it means to us.
It became a way for me to express my gratitude not only to my father, but the more I researched and talked to different veterans that had been there or were associated in some way, I started having this urgent need as someone from this generation to thank them and to tell them that no, you are absolutely not forgotten, that my generation has had a very cushy life compared to you, and we certainly haven't gone through anything like what you have, but we do remember and we do respect what you've been through, and we want to thank you.